Ben Hodges is the former commanding general of the U.S. Army in Europe, and he joins me now from Germany. Hello, General. Good to see you again, sir.
Dana, thank you very much for the privilege again.
Let's hit the news. North Korea, Russia, President Putin and Kim Jong-un have just met actually today as we record this. A strategic cooperation agreement. Cause for concern.
Well, I'm concerned, of course, that North Korea is providing apparently millions of rounds of artillery ammunition to Russia and probably some other things. There's a lot of question about the quality of what's being provided, but nonetheless, it's pretty clear that there is a lot of ammunition being provided. So there's nothing good about that. Um, but I'm also concerned that we can't seem to do anything about it. I mean, I was just looking at a map before you and I started speaking of the route that this ammunition goes, how they transfer it by ship from North Korea to Russia, and then it moves by rail the entire distance of Russia. I can't believe there's nothing we can do about that it can't be interdicted somehow along the way. I'm sure the Ukrainians are looking for ways to do that, but surprising that we seemingly are unable to do anything about it. And then, of course, this emboldens North Korea. They will, without a doubt, in addition to getting money from Russia for the ammunition, they'll also get some technology about their satellites, rocket and missile capabilities that will increase the risk to our allies in South Korea and Japan.
I think the former ambassador, U.S. ambassador to Russia, Mike McFaul, put up a pretty interesting post today saying essentially, this is a frightening situation because Putin clearly is never going to sign on to another strategic arms control agreement. America now is talking about maybe it should expand its nuclear arsenal. I mean, we are in a new arms race, and North Korea probably stands to benefit from some of the technology that Russia has for missile platforms, launch platforms for the missiles themselves, and delivery systems, including submarines.
Well, you're right, and of course, the Russians have not complied with or lived up to any other agreements for quite some time. So this is not shocking here, and they don't feel any obligation to. They don't feel we haven't been able to impress on them or force them to live up to it, and so here we are. And I think it would be foolhardy to expect that they'll do anything else until we show that we are serious about these things, and which means that all the other countries have to participate as well. It can't be something that only the U.S. can enforce. So I think you're exactly right that this is not a good situation for us or for countries that see North Korea as a threat.
And this is not some airy-fairy geopolitical conversation. If you're a Ukrainian soldier sitting on the front line in one of those trenches near Russian forces, because this translates into real ammunition that is being used on the battlefield shipped from North Korea to the Russians. Do you think it's making a big difference in their campaign in this war of attrition?
Well, you and I have talked about before how war is a test of will and it's a test of logistics. And so if it's so important that Putin is willing to humiliate himself to go flying all the way to Pyongyang and hug Kim Jong-un in order to get ammunition, it tells you that they're in desperate need of that ammunition. And so much for the people that were wringing their hands about 40% of Russia's economy is now on a war footing. That's the equivalent to 40% of Spain's economy. So put it in context. So we're not talking about 40% of the German or the American economy, or the British. It's 40% of Spain's economy. That's the size of Russia. So they need this. Now, this is also why it's important that U.S. policy should not restrict Ukraine from using weapons inside of Russia. I mean, we know where the ammunition is going. We know exactly where it's being offloaded. The Ukrainians should be free to use any weapon they have from whoever they receive it to strike where these trains are coming in.
Okay, supposedly that rule, can you help me pick through that? Supposedly that rule was changed. The Biden administration has said that Ukraine can hit into Ukraine, and in fact, they have done so. But then the use of ATACMS is still restricted. I
There's
think.
there's two there's two important caveats to that supposed lessening of restrictions, which is maddening anyway. I mean, if we were serious about helping Ukraine win, there would not be a restriction. So this is really, I think, unhelpful. But the first caveat is ATACMS cannot be used. So the weapon that would be most effective at 300-kilometer range, they can't use that. The second thing, they can only use American-provided weapons across the border into Russia if it's proximate to Kharkiv or directly related to Russian troops coming across the border there. So a logistics site that might not be anywhere near Kharkiv is therefore untouchable, at least using American systems. This is ridiculous. There's no legal, moral, or operational reason not to allow this. This is 100% the result of the administration, unfortunately, still being excessively concerned that Russia might somehow escalate, which they're not going to do, or that the U.S. policy really seems to be that we just want this thing to kind of grind to a halt, which is incredibly short-sighted.
The Center for War Studies said essentially in a map that they published this week that even when you look at that area that the Ukrainians are allowed to hit with U.S. weapons inside of Russia, that in fact it's only about 15% that all the supply and logistics and air bases, the things that are key to stopping the Russian onslaught, are in fact in that other what's my math? 85%. 85%.
85%, very good. Yeah, I mean, as General Breedlove describes it, we are in effect giving Russia sanctuary from which they were able to kill innocent Ukrainians, civilians, strike civilian infrastructure, as well as attack Ukrainian forces. So this is you would think we would eventually learn from this. We allowed the North Vietnamese to have sanctuary and the Viet Cong during that long war. We allowed the Taliban to have sanctuary in Pakistan. So if you're going to be serious about winning, then you have to eliminate sanctuary either through kinetic or economic or diplomatic means.
Do you think that this is one of those slow drips? It's just bound to change anyway. That eventually the Biden administration says, okay, yeah, you can finally use some of the American weapons inside Russia, but only this far. Do you think that's just going to, it's going to change like tanks, like F-16s, like ATACMS, like long range or longer range?
Well, of course, number one, yes. Number two, there are no F-16s yet. I mean, more than 2.5 years since the large-scale invasion, or almost 2.5 years, not a single F-16 is flying. And that's, again, because of our reluctance or our unwillingness or our inability to help train enough pilots to get them ready to go. These are bad policy decisions that come from the fact that there is no clear objective. It's very difficult to come up with good policy if there's no strategic aim that gives reason for the policy. I mean, policy is the how you implement what's needed to be done to accomplish the aim. And the strategic aim, the objective, is still not clearly identified. They can't come out and just say, we recognize it's in our strategic interest that Ukraine defeats Russia, and therefore we're going to do everything necessary for them. Instead, you get this ridiculous, we're with you for as long as it takes, which means nothing, and you get policies that make no sense. So the fact that Russian weapons and targets are given sanctuary in 85% of the region that Ukraine should be able to hit, that's a second lieutenant would not come up with something like that.
You've talked about the fact in some of your social media posts that Ukraine's doing a pretty good job in Crimea, that you're seeing a lot of things that maybe we don't take note of or we don't add up at the end of the day. And that is that Ukraine is slowly removing Russian defenses in Crimea, and you paint what seems like a platform or a foothold for further action. What does that look like, do you think, in Crimea from the Ukrainians?
Well, first of all, I would say uh, too many casual observers assume that liberating Crimea can only be done with a Normandy D-Day type invasion. Okay. And clearly, Ukraine is not in a position to do that right now, but nor are they required to have to do that right now. Instead, I think liberating Crimea, which is the most important terrain of this whole war, because of what it allows the Russians or the Ukrainians to do in the Black Sea, economically and maritime wise, is you take it in stages. And this is what the Ukrainians are doing. You have to isolate it, which means the three sort of main ways you get in and out of Crimea is the Kerch Bridge, ferries that come across Azov Sea, or railroad. So the Ukrainians are already chipping away at the available ferries and Black Sea Fleet LSTs, landing ship tank, that are used to move stuff back and forth. That bridge will be dropped when the Ukrainians are ready for it to be dropped. And the railroad will be the easiest thing to hit whenever they're ready to. So the isolation part, that's in the works. The other stage is making it untenable so that the Russians can't use it. That means using the weapons that have been provided. And even Secretary Austin now talks about how good it is that now the Ukrainians are using ATACMS, the 300-kilometer range ATACMS, to hit targets in Sevastopol, which is the Navy base, and other places around Crimea. And then, of course, there was a report that came out, I think, 3 days ago that showed all the different air defense weapons that have been destroyed in Crimea. I think this is very clever targeting as well. This is exactly how we would do it. We would eliminate the enemy's air defense so that then other systems can come in and hit the targets. So this is an important part of making it easier for drones to get in and strike, as well as eventually perhaps manned aircraft.
Quick point, why are they waiting on the Kirch Bridge? What's the point of waiting?
Well, it's going to be such a massive undertaking. I mean, this is not a matter of a couple of Taurus, if they ever get those, or 3 or 4 ATACMS. I mean, that's a huge bridge. I'm not an engineer, but I mean, I've been looking at this now for the last couple of years, and the Russians have done a lot of things to protect it against maritime drones. You know, they've sunk vessels along the sides to prevent that.
Okay.
They've got a lot of air defense all around that place to prevent other drones from coming in. So I think um, probably the most clever guy on the planet, General Budanov, he's got a team working on what would be required, what sort of operation will be required to get enough explosive to be able to inflict real damage to that bridge. It'll be part of an operation: distraction, deception, a combination of things. It might happen in phases over hours or over days. I don't know, but it's not something you can do. Well, we didn't get it this time; we'll get it next week. It'll be a big operation, and so I think they will want the time to be right when it not only you get the benefit of the destruction, but it contributes to other things that are going on elsewhere as well.
I know I have limited time with you, General. What about NATO? You're in touch with so many people in NATO. What is the nervousness of a possible return of President Trump, and are they more than just kind of chattering about it in the hallway? Are they laying a foundation now so that support for Ukraine and other NATO strategy as will continue on, so that even if Trump gets starts squeezing funding on NATO, or even talks about removing the U.S. from NATO, which he talked about before. What's the plan? Is there one?
Well, the biggest danger with Donald Trump as president when it comes to NATO is that he constantly undermines the cohesion of the alliance. And that's always been the secret sauce of NATO, is that the Russians and others never doubted, and the members never doubted, that if it came down to it, that everybody would be together. That doesn't mean you don't have enormous arguments with allies, that you don't have huge differences on many different things. And of course, every president since Truman has complained that our European allies, not just the Germans, but most of our European allies, did not carry their fair share of the burden. So former President Trump was, following the tradition of criticizing our European allies for not spending enough. But nobody ever questioned whether or not the U.S. would be there, that we would live up to our obligations under Article 5. And then the fact that he even talks about, pulling out damages that cohesion. And of course, that's a signal to the Russians that, okay, maybe we could do something, and the Americans under Trump would not really react. And that's all the Russians want to do. They don't, unlike in the Cold War when they had a big red arrow that was aimed across Europe to conquer it. Now they just want to break the alliance. And the way you break the alliance is to demonstrate that nations actually won't live up to what they said they would. So that's the biggest danger. And it's terrible for the United States. We benefit so much from NATO. I mean, with less than 100,000 troops, I mean, that's how many people can sit in Wembley Stadium or the stadium at the University of Michigan. That's not a lot of people. We have access for our Army, Navy, Air Force, intelligence, special forces all over Europe that helps us in Africa and the Middle East and Eurasia, not just in Europe. So the benefits to us economically, stable, secure Europe is essential for American prosperity. Why would anybody want to put that in risk just because Germany doesn't spend 2%, or the French are not, or the Canadians don't? So I think at the end of the day, it was important that members of Congress, including Republicans, voted to change the law that says no American president can unilaterally withdraw from NATO. So even the Republicans recognize the idiocy and the danger of that. Now, of course, nothing forces the president to do anything. I mean, so he could stop talking about withdrawing from NATO, but he's not forced to do anything. So he could just sort of, okay, fine. But again, that would hurt us. We'd be hurting ourselves more than anyone.
That's why President Biden signed this bilateral agreement. There are other bilateral agreements with Ukraine that have been done, but a lot of people say that, there's a clause in there that you get out of that within, I think it was 6 months. So if Trump comes in, he can abandon the bilateral agreements as well. So he can pull support for NATO, and he can also pull the bilateral support that America has for Ukraine.
Well, that would be true of any president all the time. I mean, the executive thing is just that. It's signed by the executive. So forget Trump, forget Ukraine. That would always be the case. I think these bilateral agreements are important. We have bilateral agreements with Germany, Poland, all the other countries, other allies as well. And anything that helps improve Ukraine's ability to defend itself, to improve their training and education, their infrastructure, their modernization, I'm for it. But that should not be confused with as another step towards membership in NATO, or that, irreversible momentum. It's not that. And it's also definitely not a security guarantee. The only security guarantee is Ukraine inside NATO.
Yeah, another conversation for another time, and we're not there yet. Although they would like them to be. General Ben Hodges, what a great treat always to be able to talk to you. So when I get a chance, thank you so much. Have a wonderful summer, and I know you're going to the NATO conference, so I'm sure you'll be whispering in lots of ears there, as generals generally don't whisper, but you'll be talking to people about the way you think the war should be handled and where it should be going.
I think it's too important to just, I can't just sit in the bleachers and watch. I'm trying to help make sure that, you know, the United States doesn't turn its back on our allies, and that the NATO does not turn its back on Ukraine.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Dana.